Hi there, and welcome to this workshop where I am going to be taking you through the 3 steps to supporting your transformation journey ahead of this new cookieless world that we're going to be finding ourselves in 2025. It's not going to take too much of your time, it's going to be packed with a whole bunch of value. Let's get into it. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the 3 steps to support you when everything goes cookieless. Specifically, we are actually going to be talking about how you can avoid data loss and how you can keep on top of your compliance and your data governance as a result of the steps that we're going to take. So, first of all, let's talk about what's actually going to happen. Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying that this has been in the works, been spoken about by many journalists and industry leaders for a number of years now. Privacy concerns are increasing, it seems, by the day lately. And so companies are kind of trying to put processes and operational things in place to support the end user. Now, we are predominantly, actually more exclusively, talking about these changes in regards to Google Chrome. These changes are specifically coming to the Google Chrome browser. They are pretty much the last browser to implement something like this to protect users at the end of any kind of funnel or process. And the reason why it's such a big deal is because there's a large majority of users out there in the world that use Chrome as their primary browser. Other browsers such as Safari, Firefox, and I think even Internet Explorer, don't know who uses that now, but still, have already made shifts to stop supporting third party cookies. Okay. So what we are going to see here, I can't move my camera out of the way, I apologize, is that in 2025, the internet is finally going cookieless. One thing we are unsure and uncertain about is the exact date this is going to happen. It feels like it's been pushed a couple of times, but the inevitability is still there. So one of the caveats and the takeaways from this workshop is the earlier you can achieve this 3-step process, you will be in a far better situation than the majority of businesses out there, not just your competitors. You won't just be ahead of your competitors, you'll be ahead of whole industries. As I kind of alluded to, trackers are a big element of this. And now instead of, so the browsers are effectively sunsetting the support of third-party cookies, and now first-party trackers are going to be the go-to method of data collection. So what does that actually mean? So third-party trackers are anything from your product analytics tool through to your advertising pixels that you have on your website to collect conversions and post information back to places like Meta to build audiences for retargeting or even lookalike audiences. So what will happen is those third-party cookies are no longer going to be recognized. They're going to be automatically blocked by the browser like other browsers already do. And so this is obviously an issue. So we need to move to a first-party tracker process in order to work around the future of tracking on the internet. And I just kind of alluded to it there. Targeting is going to be a big thing. So actually, there are going to be far more limited tracking options as a result of this. And we're going to get into this in just a second. But there's going to be, the whole reason for this is really just because of a misuse of data, which leads me into why this is actually happening. So across the internet, as we speak, every second of every day, there is the recording of digital footprints of mine and yours and your peers, your wives, your partners, your kids, your whoever, your grandchild, your grandparents, whoever it is. Their digital footprint is constantly being recorded. Cookies are set in the browser. They draw in information. They create a profile. They add to our profile based on either anonymized or identified IDs. They are typically more identified IDs. And then that information is basically then being pushed elsewhere. Now, the reason this is such a huge impact is mostly because on the advertising and the marketing industry, to be perfectly honest. It's because that profile data that's being built up is then typically essentially lifted, pushed over to programmatic engines where like auction houses, where this data is effectively put up for auction and sold to the highest bidder, i.e., you're putting up a Meta ad or a Google ad or something like that. And it's getting too much in the eyes of privacy laws and regulations. It's getting too much in the eyes of the general consumer. They don't feel very comfortable with that anymore. And the more education, the more they learn about it, especially with negative news, which seems to be a case in the majority of situations, they don't want it anymore. They'd rather no one had any information on, because at the end of the day, like, and myself included as a consumer, we are not benefiting from it except for some what are deemed highly relevant ads and products to buy. I don't always want to buy products. Another conversation for another day. What is happening is that data is also being potentially really misused in how it is being sold on. You ever get one of those phone calls or multiple phone calls from from a company that is asking if you've been in an accident? Very, very similar to that, if not the exact same. They're trying to collect all these bits of information on you. There's some misuse in terms of the way that information is stitched together, and we end up getting spammed and irritated and frustrated by all of these different approaches. The big reason why this is happening is to protect the people. Power to the consumer, power to the end person who is actually giving that data and not really being rewarded for doing so. So we move into our steps. Step 1. First party data is now, should be, your new best friend. There are 2 parts to this step. And the first step is what I would recommend that you do is you identify the separate tools and the separate cookies which are being fired or being treated as third party on your website or in your product. Typically, everything with a Meta, if it's mixed panel amplitude, any A/B testing tool, surveying tools, anything like that, they will typically be held as a third party cookie. And the reason for that is that you're not setting up the process of collecting the information from the browser or from interactions and then sending it off. Tools like Segment, Mixed Panel Amplitude, just to name a few, are basically providing you with that already out of the box. Reduces on dev time, of course, reduces on the lift from a business perspective. Hey, don't worry, we'll just put our Mixed Panel branded cookie in. We'll collect the information, and it only gets sent to your project, right? There's obviously, it sends it in a suitable direction. It's not sending it in multiple different directions, but it will send it in the direction you point it in, and that will be your own business-owned project, right? In theory, it shouldn't go anywhere else. But in some instances, with dev or kind of tech resources in your company, some can be set as some first-party cookie functionality. And what you need to do as a founder, product owner, product manager, growth expert, if you're not in the tech team and the dev team, or if you've been in your company for a very small amount of time, you need to identify what the different tools are that you've got running as your tech stack, and the different cookies that are available on your website, and you need to identify how they're being triggered. Once you've understood that, the second part of this step is to select the tools and the cookies of which are absolutely imperative for your business to run and to function appropriately. There is such a thing as contractual fulfillment when it comes to collecting data. Good question to ask is, can we provide our users with the product and or service that we offer without identifiable information either about them or about behavior, even if it's anonymized? So that is something really to take strongly into consideration. Do your homework, understand what tools you've got, understand their functionality, understand how they fit in the role of fulfilling on your product or service. Step 2, you've now got to think about and embrace different tracking solutions. In this particular instance, you have 2. The first one is a self-hosted option. This means you basically turn your third party cookies into first party branded cookies. From a technical perspective, there is a process and the ability to place cookies in a browser which are branded as your particular brand's cookies. Okay, and that's absolutely 100% acceptable. So, for example, in Vision Digital, if I was running a product and we had, say, Mixpanel segment, was then collected to Mixpanel, and then we had maybe Meta conversion in there as well. I can, instead of on my browser, those cookies being called Mixpanel actions, for example, and then Meta conversion pixel, I would change that to Envision Digital like behavioral analytics cookie and an Envision Digital marketing analytics cookie, or marketing and advertising cookie rather. So you're then telling the browser that you've got two cookies set via segment, but you are not telling them. You're then saying that I own them. I am collecting and transferring this data, so it's okay. So there's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is going server side. Now, a caveat here is not all of your events are going to be able to be pushed and therefore collected server side. So there is some identification that you'll need to do with your dev and or product team if you're not part of those teams in order to identify what can and can't be pushed to server side. But server side is going to be fully owned by yourself. It'd be your servers. We're not talking about anyone else's servers. So if you don't have server, you need to spin up a server. Again, talk with product and marketing, dev teams rather, in order to have that be the case. But what you're able to do is you are able to run the third-party trackers on a server-side collection. So you don't need to go and rename them. You don't need to repurpose them, etc., etc. You then can just almost keep them as they are. The process of this is, instead of collecting client side, so like on your website or in your product, instead of collecting those actions and that behavior and then sending it off to those tools, you basically have an extra step in between where you are effectively sending that same information but to a server. So it's not calling like Mixpanel or segment in that time. It's just saying, here server, have this information. And then at that point is then Mixpanel and or segment, or insert any other tool, that's then being written at the server side implementation to then send that information onto your tools. So very, very different, two very different approaches. I must say, in my experience of talking with these SaaS tech companies, a lot of them have been talking pretty much exclusively about server side. But what I will say, in my own personal experience of having run this with a business, we opted to do the self-hosting approach, and it has worked as impactfully as we would have hoped for, versus a server-side implementation. So both are very viable. You just have to make sure what the business use case is, and also consider some data governance in line with that to make sure it suits the policies of your business. Step 3 is very much staying ahead with privacy regulations. This is a big deal, and to put a bit of color to that, there isn't one privacy regulation for the entire world, and different countries and in different states of kind of behavioral analytics. And so there are a lot of challenges that can come with setting the right things at the right time, to put it quite vaguely, I suppose. You want to be considering the fact that there are certain, especially in Europe with like GDPR, you have to opt in, but in other areas around the world, it's very much you can just opt out. So you're automatically opted in, and you have to opt out. So whereas GDPR is you're opted out, you have to opt in. But this changes from country to country around the world. So being able to understand what those challenges mean for your data strategy and the collection of your data, and then being able to get ahead of those privacy regulations and get ahead of those challenges, is going to be really impactful. This also does have quite a significant impact with the trust that you build with users, making sure that they understand the policies in as clear as language as possible if they want to go and read them. Your cookie consent banners and management systems need to be clear about where the data is going and how it's being collected, so they feel at ease and can actually feel comfortable and trust your brand. So one thing I want to give you guys is just to say, do not get stuck in the mindset that you are going to be always compliant. It doesn't matter if you don't sell on or you don't pass on your data past any of these third party kind of systems and tools. Again, whether it's a mixed panel, an amplitude, a VWO, user centrics, any of those particular MarTech tools, it doesn't matter if you then say, oh, it doesn't matter because you don't sell or pass it on. You're passing it on to a system and a tool which you still have control over, but unfortunately, there are still some things that can go wrong. So you're still reliant on their controllability and the way that they handle that data. Okay, so it's really important you do not hit the well. It doesn't go anywhere malicious, so we don't need to worry about it. And do stick with the kind of mindset that it's we just need to make sure that the company is covered in the best way possible, and then run consent management optimization alongside that to help improve your opt-ins. So let's just go over these consequences just a little bit more for you here. Loss of data, far smaller data sets if you don't implement this. If you start losing that data overnight, then you're going to have a far smaller set of data. You're going to be learning from samples of your behavioral collection instead of the whole picture. So you're going to have to apply a lot more predictive and kind of guesstimate modeling moving forwards. And that can lead to some quite shaky decisions being made. And also, you're going to fall behind competitors and industry trends. If you don't have this information, you don't have the ability to make those informed actions and decisions as a result of your collection. You're going to inhibit your user experience. So you're going to find it difficult to improve on your existing experience. You're going to find it difficult to run A/B tests and experiments that are going to create a significant impact and uplift on your business and your users. And you're also going to take quite a hit in reduced confidence and trust from your customers. And that won't necessarily be overnight, but that will definitely happen in a medium to long term. Fines for being not compliant. I don't want to put too much emphasis on this. Obviously, there's a fine system in place for GDPR non-compliance, and it's unknown, or it's hard to tell kind of what the impact of this is. But to be quite honest, this should scare you enough in order just to go and get something like this done and completed, and in line with compliance. And so you may need to consult with a compliance legal specialist in order to ensure that you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's from a legal perspective, because that is very different from the actual implementation and or transformation of what you currently have. So there we go. So I hope you've taken something out of that you can take back to your teams. Should have a step-by-step process as to understand where you need to start and where you should be heading. Identify and select the tools in which you need to transform into either a self-hosting or a server-side process. And then also on top of that, make sure that your data is compliant. So look at your consent management options and make sure that information is being collected timely, accurately, and also in compliance with the alphabet soup of which is privacy regulations around the world. Just a quick 10 seconds. I didn't introduce myself at the top. My name's Josh. I run Envision Digital, and we transform advertising into ROI positive growth loops. We use these 6 things, and I appreciate the bottom left there, data strategy isn't there, but we use owned earned media, user acquisition, behavioral analytics, lifecycle communication, surveying and interviews, amongst a few other little nifty and crafty marketing and product tactics in order to bring users into your growth loop, hit them with really rich and valuable content and information, and nurture them along the way to being a customer. So if you're interested in having a conversation, please reach out to me via the website. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.